my precious. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my Masculine Feminine Energies film breakdown series with the epic trilogy Lord of the Rings. For starters, if you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I have a ton of videos on this content, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy. This is when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies, and each of these energies contains archetypes. We all embody all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine, because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get into Lord of the Rings. To be honest with you, there is so much to talk about. We're talking about three, like, say 3.5-ish so length movies. A lot of characters, a lot of storylines, a lot of stuff. So just a brief background of my knowledge and experience of this series. This was my first time watching the Lord of the Rings movies. I grew up with the stories. My dad's a big Tolkien fan. I'm more familiar with The Hobbit than I am with Lord of the Rings, but I primarily knew the basic characters. Bilbo Baggins, Frodo, Gandalf, Gollum. I used to have nightmares about Gollum when I was a little kid. It was a bit too much for my anxiety-riddled childhood to handle. But anyway, any creepy dude who wants to steal my jewelry in the middle of the night is gonna give me nightmares. Just saying. And I always intended to actually watch the Lord of the Rings movies. It's just that I knew that they were so long. There were 3 of them, and I just really never got around to it. But I had so many requests to talk about the Lord of the Rings, in particular the Arwen and Aragorn relationship, which is actually really amazing, and I'm so glad that I watched these movies. Even though their storyline was just a small snippet of the entire film series, it is an amazing storyline I'm going to get into. Now, I will be the first to admit I am not an expert on the whole Tolkien universe. I guarantee you there are people out there who know way more about the whole universe and everything, and I may say some things that are wrong as far as like the actual novels, and I'm really just going by the movies, although I did do a little bit of research on some of the characters and things. But I will admit I am not an expert when it comes to the whole Tolkien universe. I'm primarily going to focus on the masculine and feminine dynamics in this movie. Now, it's interesting, I did not realize until actually I was watching the final movie, Return of the King, that Tolkien was Catholic and that there was a lot of Catholic symbolism in the movie. I suspected it, and I actually thought I was a little crazy because I was starting to think of like Aragorn as having kind of like a Jesus quality, and so I decided to look up and see if anybody else had that same connection or if I was losing my mind. And that's why I realized that Tolkien was Catholic. I was raised Catholic, and when I was watching Return of the King especially, the biblical symbols in this movie were like overpowering. So at least I know I'm not crazy in making that connection originally. I kind of wish I'd known that before I started watching the first movie, because then I probably would have been able to pick up a lot more things. But Return of the King, specifically the final film, really had so many biblical references. It was like, and probably a lot more that I didn't even pick up on because I haven't really read the Bible since I was in Catholic school. So I don't particularly take a religious take on things when I talk about the masculine and the feminine. There is a spiritual element, but a lot of the things I talk about as far as the divine masculine and the divine feminine, they're really concepts that have been carried on through many other religions. There's some things that have transferred over to Christianity. There's some things, and I mean, some of these things exist outside of organized religion, but a lot of organized religions, mythologies, things like that have been designed to put these ideas of the masculine and the feminine into, you know, symbols and stories and characters and things like that. None of this stuff is meant to take away from anybody's specific religious beliefs. I do feel very much that a lot of our kind of current idea of organized religion tends to cut out the divine feminine. It doesn't necessarily always cut out the feminine specifically, but it very often cuts out the divine feminine and focuses only on the divine masculine. And one of the things I really liked about the Tolkien movie is there is a lot of symbolism of both the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So some of the stuff I might get into in this movie might seem a little out there to some of you that are watching this, but I thought my analysis of Titanic and the divine feminine and the masculine was gonna really throw people off, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. So maybe some of you will enjoy my out there ideas about the divine masculine, divine feminine, and Lord of the Rings. So if you're up for it, let's get into this. So first I want to talk a little bit about the universe itself that is created in this storyline. And there's all kinds of different, I guess they call them races, but they're kind of different groups of people. And I really do think that they symbolize different things in different areas now. So for example, when I see the elves in this story, and again, this is where you kind of have to take the gender aspect out of it slightly, because the elves are male and female. However, the elves really do feel like a representation of the divine feminine. There's so many aspects to the elves that is very connected to the feminine and the feminine archetypes. That's not to say that they're all effeminate, but it's to say they're more connected with the divine feminine. If you look at the world that the elves live in, like their homes, right? It's very much, there's so much nature, there's so much vibrance, there's so much light. The feminine is connected to nature, the feminine is connected to light, radiance. Everything is much more intricate, beautiful for the sake of beauty's sake, you know what I mean? Like not everything feels like it's practical and structured in the same way that you would see more of the masculine castles and villages that are more designed for structure, practicality, things like that. The elf sort of landscapes tend to be more filled with things that we associate with the divine feminine. Beauty for the sake of beauty, light, radiance, nature, abundance. Elves are natural seers. They're natural oracles, and I'm going to get into more of that in a minute. The feminine is the oracle. It's the heart wisdom. It's the seers, the inner wisdom, that kind of thing. And simply the sake of using the bow and arrows, it has a very divine huntress energy that you would see in a lot of the goddesses in all kinds of different cultures that tend to be more of a huntress. You see them more using bows and arrows and things like that. It has a very huntress energy quality to them. It's not that the feminine is passive. It's not that the feminine is weak. We're talking about divine feminine energy here. So we're talking about, you know, feminine energy that is willing to fight. So we're not talking about the stereotypical idea of being feminine as being girly or being weak or passive. We're talking about divine feminine energy here. I'm going to dive deeper into Arwen when I talk about her relationship with Aragorn. But I actually want to talk about Galadriel because I was actually looking her up because I wanted to double check and make sure that she was an elf, which she is. She's kind of like one of the most powerful beings in this world. She is a seer, she is an oracle. And I actually read this description of Galadriel. It's a website that described her as being one of the most powerful beings in this universe. And this is how they described her. She has the ability to heal, create, see into the hearts of men, discern the future. Think about that description for a second. She has the power to heal. Think about the feminine as, you know, the divine mother who kisses the wounds that makes them better. If you think about that aspect, to create. The feminine is literally creative. It literally creates life. The feminine is creative energy. See into the hearts of men. That's the feminine divine wisdom. That's the feminine oracle. And I'm actually going to do a whole video about feminine as the oracle and dive into that much deeper because that's like a topic I'm very passionate about. But Galadriel is the ultimate divine feminine version of that. She can see into the hearts of men. She can see into the hearts of really everybody. She can see the future. Like she is that inner oracle wisdom. I just thought that description, it's a random website that described her that way, but I just thought like, oh my god, that describes the divine feminine so perfectly. So the elves in general, while the elves are male and female, really does seem like the elves take on a quality that does seem to be connected more to the divine feminine. Whereas I would say that the wizards in general, specifically Gandalf, does seem to be connected more to the divine masculine. He does have a divine masculine quality to him. If you look at Gandalf as a character, and I've talked about the masculine archetypes before, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. There's a book about that. Highly recommend the book that's by that title, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. If you look at somebody like Gandalf, he is really the epitome of the masculine archetype of the magician because he does have that magical powers, really. I mean, he has that immortal magic to him that comes with that magician energy that you see in the divine masculine. He's also a lover. If you think, he really does care about people. He cares about the hobbits, Bilbo and Frodo and all of them. He has so much heart that he really does care about the people that he's trying to protect. He has a warrior in him for sure. He is willing to step up and fight whenever he needs to fight to protect. That's that warrior in him. And in reality, he really does embody the king-like energy because he really is, he's kind of that ultimate father figure. He's the divine masculine father figure among everybody. Like he really does kind of carry this movie as being the wise the wise king-like father figure. And then there's man, which in this particular case, when we talk about man, so to speak, I'm talking about humankind. When we talk about humankind, we're kind of talking about the male and the female, but generally speaking in this movie, when we talked about man, for the most part, it was the males in the population, so to speak. And they're really the human men, which really does represent the masculine, like the everyday human form of the masculine. Now, the Hobbits are interesting, and I got to thinking about where I would put the Hobbits as part of this whole storyline as far as the masculine and the feminine. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought the Hobbit land, the Shire, so to speak, is representative of childhood. If you think about it, think about the hobbits and the way that they live their life. They're kind of eternal children, not just because they're small. I mean, they call them halflings, but their life is just full of playfulness. They have the abundance, and they're very big on agriculture, which is connected to the divine feminine. Most of us as children are more connected to feminine energy in general. It's the playfulness. It's always, you know, their only cares are not missing a meal, really. I mean, their only cares are, you know, having fun, being playful. It's very much representative of childhood. And the hobbits that we focus on in this movie are primarily male. And in reality, what a lot of the journey is that these hobbits go on is really the journey of the childlike boy into becoming a man, to connecting with their masculine. It's something they talk about in a lot of other cultures, but particularly in the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. I mention that book all the time because it's really amazing. Men really do have to be initiated from boyhood into manhood. There needs to be that initiation process. You could easily make the argument that one of the biggest problems we have in our world today is boys are not initiated into that. So most of the grown adult men that we have in our society now, unfortunately, a lot of them are still acting like little boys or even adolescents and have not stepped into their divine masculine yet. And if you notice that in this movie, the hobbits, who all are very childlike, they're very playful, they kind of just live for fun and excitement, when they're actually taken on this adventure, it really is their initiation process, like into manhood. And I think that that's really what the hobbits represent. Now, of course, there is a lot of biblical references in this. I mean, the hobbits versus the rest of the world is really just a David and Goliath story about the underdog and the big, strong, powerful man. And I think it's even Galandria that says at one point the smallest person can make a difference, or is some variation on that. It's like, it really doesn't matter about your size. It's really like how determined you are. Like, everybody can make a difference. Like, we're all powerful. And it's really a lot about the hobbits themselves, really, especially Frodo, but I would say Sam as well, Pippin and Merry for sure, like all of them really learning about themselves, like caring about something more, having a greater purpose in life. I would also note that a lot of the storylines in this really are a bit of a man versus nature kind of thing. Nature is almost always representative of the feminine. And the fact that you have kind of like the evil people in the movie who are tearing down all the trees, destroying all the land. You see this with the Ents, if you think about it, even though they are men, because the masculine often can be represented by a tree, because it's like, I often say this, is the masculine is like the tree rooted in the ground, and the feminine is like the air that happens around the tree, the storm that, you know, the masculine is rooted in the ground. However, nature in general tends to be representative of the divine feminine. So interesting point too, where the Ents make a comment that there are no Ent females really anymore because they've just all disappeared. They don't know where they are, and they don't even remember them. I think that's very symbolic of the idea that, you know, when you get rid of anything that is feminine, you get rid of the divine feminine, really. Unfortunately, a lot of religions do. They cut out the divine feminine aspect of their entire culture. If you want to learn more about the divine feminine and their relationship to religion, I'm not a theologian, but I would definitely recommend. I've read 2 of the books by Megan Watterson. She is a theologian that studies the divine feminine and things like that. Highly recommend them. But when you cut out the divine feminine of everything, it really does make everything cold, because if you look at nature being feminine, it really does bring light, it brings aliveness, it really brings people to life. The feminine is so important, especially the divine feminine is so important. And when you have worlds where you sort of like cut out the feminine, I talked about this a lot in my Chocolat breakdown, is when you get this world that becomes just about the masculine and you cut out the feminine, things really do tend to die off. I mean, if you think about the Ents, are very caring people, they're very helpful. There is like a cold and dryness to them because they don't have their feminine energy and they're kind of being killed off. there's a lot of symbolism there. When we look at the concept of man versus nature, it really does end up being more about the masculine. Often when the masculine's ego gets too strong, and I talked about this a lot in my Titanic breakdown, the masculine ego of, say, like the ship, tries to go against the feminine of the ocean, and the feminine ocean can be soft and smooth and serene, but when the masculine ego tries to penetrate her before she's ready, like, whew, she's gonna take him down, right? So there is a lot of that. There is a lot of like man versus nature in this universe, which is very often symbolic of the battle between the masculine and the feminine. So the ring in this movie is really symbolic of ego. Now, I have a lot of videos talking about ego, so I'm not going to dive into all the nuances behind the ego. Ego can show up in a lot of different ways, but in this particular case, we're really talking about a specific type of ego, which is really the masculine ego and drive for power and control. That's really what this is. Sauron being the bad guy is really like the ultimate in the darkness of the ego. The ring is really representative of wanting the power and control, which is very much an aspect of the masculine ego. The feminine ego tends to be a little bit different. The feminine humans still have an ego. The ego is a human experience. However, in this particular case, we're talking about the masculine ego. And it's really interesting in this to see the characters who are drawn in by this ego, this ring, which you could really easily call it the ring of ego, but the ring of power, and the ones who aren't. And the ones who are around it too much tend to end up getting controlled by it. It weakens people. It really destroys people. And it's interesting the different responses that some of the different characters have to this ring. Now, you can see the ring just completely destroy someone, which is what happens with sort of Gollum / Smeagol, is he's too weak for the ring. Like he lets the ring literally ruin his life. I mean, you see it in this character overall. You see this ring just completely turn Gollum into somebody who's not even really human anymore. And it just destroys him, but he's so addicted to it. That's what happens when somebody becomes so controlled by their ego that they just don't have any, they have to essentially isolate themselves. They end up destroying themselves. Gollum and Smeagol, he's kind of multi-people in his head. He's isolated himself. I mean, you see all of this happening with the power of this, of the ego. The power of the ego is literally destroying him, and he's like destroying himself because of the power of the ego. But it is interesting how it affects characters differently, and the characters who seem to do better with the concept of this ring tend to be people who can accept their own flaws and their own weaknesses. So if you look at the people who were able to step away from the ring, meaning the ego, this power, Gandalf turns it down early on in the series. Like he says, that kind of power with somebody with his kind of power would not be good, because he knows his power, he knows his strength, and he knows if he has that egoic power, if he has that ring, it's going to turn him bad. And because he is so powerful, him turning evil would be too destructive to the world. That's knowing your own limitations. That's knowing your own strength. It's very symbolic of the idea that the masculine needs to have the capacity to be dangerous, but he needs to have that danger under his control. That danger, that ego, it can't control him. He needs to have control over that, because if the ego, the power, controls him, he becomes too dangerous for the world. And that's a very important distinction. Aragorn turns the ring down in a really interesting scene between him and Frodo, and I'm going to dive much deeper into Aragorn's character in a minute. But Aragorn turns the ring down because he knows that his bloodline is part of a line that has actually abused the ring in the past, that has abused the ego. So in Aragorn's case, he knows how much power the ring could have over him. He acknowledges his weaknesses, and I'm going to dive into him more in a minute, but he's acknowledging his weaknesses and accepting that about himself. That's a big part of connecting to your true divine masculine energy. It's to be able to acknowledge where your weaknesses are, because once you can acknowledge where your weaknesses are and you're not led by your egoic need to prove that you're perfect, which is a part of your ego, if you can accept your shadows, accept your dark sides, accept your weaknesses as a man, you can then connect to your masculine, because once you've acknowledged it, it doesn't control you. That need to be perfect, to be all powerful, that ego need to be better than everybody else, that's another way that your mind is controlling you. And in order to step into your masculine, you need to be in control of yourself. Aragorn is able to turn down the ring when Frodo offers it to him because he knows how dangerous it is. Someone like Boromir, who is in the first movie, he really is symbolic, especially in that movie, of a human man. Aragorn is man, but he's got some other aspects to him that we'll dive into. Boromir really is representative of a human man. He has such an internal struggle. Like, he knows what the right thing to do is. He also can't help but desire that power of the ring. He does want to be honorable. He wants to be a representative of the masculine. He wants to keep his word. He wants to honor the brotherhood that he has committed himself to. That need for that egoic power is almost too strong for him. And at the end of the day, if you look at the difference between him and, say, like, you know, Aragorn or even Gandalf, it's the fact that he's fighting it so much. Like, he's got that internal struggle. It ends up controlling him. Like, he wants to be an honorable man. He wants to be the divine masculine. He wants to be a king-like warrior. But he also wants the eternal power of the ring. So, like, his ego and desire for that power is in conflict with the man he wants to be. If you notice that he has so much more instability, whereas a character, say, like Aragorn, if you compare the two, is accepting of his weaknesses and of his flaws so that they don't control him, whereas someone like Boromir, it is controlling him. He loses control at times about what he's about to do because the power of the ring is controlling him. He doesn't have control over his actions when his ego kicks in. Now, of course, when you learn more about Boromir's father and that situation with him and Faramir, his brother, which has a very prodigal son kind of an aspect to it, which is another biblical idea. Faramir, later on in the series, has an easier time letting go of the ring because he sees how much, even though his father doesn't have the ring, but his father has that obsessive need for power and control. Faramir sees what it's been doing to his father and what it's done to his brother, and he sees that and he learns and wants to do better. And that's another important aspect. I think one of the reasons why Faramir tends to be kind of a noble character is because he learns from witnessing his family and people around him how much that ego need for power and control taken the life of his brother. In reality, taken the life of his father too, in a way. Even though his father was still alive, it took his father from him. He wasn't a loving king leader because that need for ego power actually made him into a very cruel man. And sometimes we need to learn these lessons for ourselves, but sometimes we can learn from seeing what some of these things like the ego does to other people. We can take on some of those lessons for ourselves. We don't have to learn everything the hard way. Galadriel? I don't know. I've been calling her Galadriel, but I just looked it up. I think it's Galadriel. Kate Blanchett's character I'm talking about. Her response to the ring being offered to her is interesting because it does show a slight difference between the masculine power and the feminine need for power. The masculine need for power tends to be about lording power over people, but if you look at what Galadriel has as her response to, like, she sees what she would be like if she had that all-encompassing power. And it isn't even so much about lording the power over people. She wanted everybody to love her. Like, she would have unlimited beauty. She would have unlimited love from people. It does really kind of show the difference between the masculine's desire for that respect at, like, any cost. Because in reality, if you are a man and you're forcing people to respect you, you're not really getting genuine respect, right? You're getting fear, but it might give your ego the sense of respect, whereas the feminine desires love. Now, of course, if you force someone to love you and they're just loving you out of fear, they don't really truly love you too. But it does really show the difference between the masculine's desire for power, which is to lord power over people, whereas the feminine's desire for power tends to be more about making everybody love her, about her being seen as being the most beautiful. Like, it's a difference between the masculine and feminine desires for that ego power. Now, you can see the masculine desire for ego power and the feminine desire for ego power. You can see that in either gender, but if somebody is more masculine at their core, their desire for power is going to tend to be at the root a need for them to be respected, even if they have to get false sense of respect, whereas the feminine need for power is going to get a sense of love, even if it's a false sense of love. So I do think that her response to the potential of having the ring and having this unbelievable power does show the difference between what the feminine would do with the power as opposed to what the masculine would do with the power. And that's not necessarily to say that either one is ideal, because being able to work through your ego is important for both men and women. However, if we really look at the way that things are represented, when the masculine gives into ego, it tends to be a lot more dangerous for a lot more people. Whereas the feminine desire for ego and power in that more feminine sense, it's not healthy by any means. It doesn't tend to lead to war. It can lead to a lot of bad stuff, but it doesn't tend to lead to something like war. So it's where when we start getting into like ego battles, like ego really is never a positive thing. It's a human experience. It's important for all of us to learn to work through, but feminine ego is rarely as dangerous as masculine ego, just because of the nature of our society. Now, Sam has a sort of interesting aspect with his relationship to the ring. He has told Gandalf that he would stay with Frodo. So his desire for the ring is really, like, he doesn't really even understand the concept of the ring. His only focus is on keeping his word, making sure that he's by his friend's side. He has a greater purpose. He literally just wants to help Frodo get through this. Like, he wants Frodo and him to survive, go back to the Shire. He has a purpose. That's really symbolic of the fact that he is stepping into his masculine. He absolutely does. I mean, this whole movie really is kind of, I mean, it's a coming of age story for all of the Hobbits, but it really is a coming of age story for Sam in particular, because he's really stepping from kind of a shy, awkward hobbit, and he ends up on this big adventure. He is solely devoted to keeping his word. He told Gandalf he was going to stay with Frodo, and he will come hell or high water, even if it risks his own life. He will do whatever he can to keep his word. He wants to make sure that Frodo is safe. He wants to help Frodo along the way. He will do anything he needs to do to complete his mission, to complete his purpose. Sam is really stepping into his masculine as this movie is going along. I think it goes to show that when the masculine really gets a purpose, like he finds his mission, he finds his purpose in life, all the ego stuff tends to not affect him as much, because he becomes very singularly focused on his mission. And oftentimes you see a lot of this grab for power, oftentimes in men that have not found their true purpose, have not found their true direction, because then they get easily distracted by the ego or the quick fix or the this, the that. Whereas when you have a masculine who has a direct purpose, like this is his purpose, this is his direction, that ego need for power, if it doesn't have anything to do with his purpose and direction, he's not really going to fall into it as much, because he doesn't need to. At the end of the day, like, Sam's mission is just to get Frodo safely to destroy the ring and then get them back to the Shire. That's his mission, that's his purpose. So him having this all-encompassing power of this, the symbol of the ego power of the ring, doesn't help him do that. Like, it doesn't really, that's not part of his purpose. And one of the things I think is just so beautiful in this storyline, I mean, and there's so many, again, the biblical symbols, the concept of Sam saying, I can't carry it, but I can carry you, very much like the footsteps poem that you hear about, you know, asking Jesus why he wasn't walking with you because there was only one set of footsteps, and he's like, well, because I carried you, that kind of thing. Like, it's very symbolic. The fact that Sam is carrying the bread, it's elven bread, which if you think about it again, elven, the divine feminine, feminine is nourishing, the feminine literally feeds. If you think about it, the feminine literally like feeds children. Elven bread, breaking bread together as brothers, and, you know, eating this bread that has come from the divine feminine, which is nourishing them along the way. And they go on this adventure together, and the story of Sam is really interesting, because at the beginning of the story, again, he's kind of insecure. He's like, he has a crush on this fellow hobbit that he's really in love with, and he just thinks she's amazing, but he's too shy to talk to her. And then he goes through this whole adventure together with Frodo and all of, you know, the other Fellowship of the Ring, and he achieves this purpose, he achieves his goal, and then when he gets back to the Shire, he's not afraid to talk to the woman that he's you know, been secretly in love with, because he's achieved something, he's achieved his goal. And I think that that's one of the things where you see so many young men who are like afraid to talk to girls, who don't know how to talk to girls. At the end of the day, if you as a boy turning into manhood, or, you know, even a grown man, if you have a purpose and direction, you're willing to take chances, you're willing to take risks, you're willing to step outside the box, you're willing to find your true purpose in life, you don't need to learn how to talk to girls, what the right way to talk to girls is, because once you become the man that you're meant to be. You've actually proven to yourself that you can overcome anything, you can overcome challenges, you've overcome defeat. When you actually like live life to the fullest, you take chances, and you don't even actually have to fully find your true purpose, but you're at least on that path, then talking to a girl and whether or not she's into you or whether or not she isn't, at the end of the day, a girl maybe turning you down isn't going to seem like the worst thing in the world to you. It's just going to be like, okay, whatever, I'll move on and I'll do something else. I think what often happens is when you have a lot of these, especially young guys, who get so obsessed with the concept of rejection, it's because, well, if they haven't ever done anything else with their life, a rejection from a girl is going to be completely devastating for them. Whereas as a man, if you actually are stepping into the man that you can be, if you're finding your purpose in life, you're actually doing things that you're embodying your king, your warrior, your magician, your lover, you're embodying all of your masculine archetypes and becoming the divine masculine man that you have the potential to be, a woman turning you down is not going to be that big a deal. You know, it's just going to be, you know, they say rejection is God's protection. It just means that there's someone else out there that's right for you, and you put less stock in that one woman, whether or not she's going to talk to you, because Sam has turned into the man that he wants to be. He gets the woman that he wants because he's turned into the man that is aligned with being a great husband and father, a protector and provider for his family. And he manages to have that life that he's always dreamed of because he's proven to himself all of his abilities and stuff. I mean, the story of Sam and really turning into, you know, finding his masculinity is really, it's a beautiful aspect to this whole movie. Now let's get to Aragorn and Arwen, because I know that's what everyone wants to talk about. Now, Aragorn, oh my god, he is probably the most masculine character. I mean, I've done some breakdowns of some films with some very masculine characters. Aragorn takes the cake. Now, there's a lot of aspects to him that they don't get into fully in the movie that I tried to kind of fill in some holes as far as like what his storyline was. I thought at first that he was part elf and part man, and that really did kind of make sense as being like part divine and part human, which I think kind of gave him a sort of Jesus-like quality to him. But apparently he's not actually part elf, but he was raised with the elves. He's actually all human man, but he does have he's part of another group of people that basically, like, he's still mortal, but he lives in an unusually long life, which is why they imply that he's actually like in his 80s. He ages very slowly, which does kind of give him a connection to the divine. And the fact that he was raised with the divine feminine, but he is such a grounded masculine character and such a warrior. I don't love the idea of balance as far as the masculine and the feminine, because I think that implies having equal masculine and feminine, which is not really ideal for most people. You want to be embodied in your natural core energy the most, which in Aragorn's case would be very masculine. But you also want to have a connection to your opposite energy. So I would say one of the great things about Aragorn and Arwen in particular is Aragorn is a masculine man. He is very connected to his masculine energy, but he has a connection to his feminine energy, his heart, his empathy. Arwen is a very feminine character. She's very connected to her feminine core, but she also has a connection to her masculine, primarily her huntress energy, I would say, which is connected to the divine feminine, but the huntress energy has some divine masculine in it. That's why they're such a beautiful balance, right? Because they really have that. When I say balance, they have the perfect balance for them. They have that perfect polarity between the two of them. The thing about Aragorn, which I mentioned before, he's not led by his ego. He understands that he is from a bloodline that has abused the power of the ring of the ego, and he fears it. But he fears it in a way that is acknowledging that this is a possibility that he may be as bad with this ring. And so it's kind of like that's his shadow self, and he's acknowledging his shadow, he's acknowledging his dark side, so that his dark side does not control him. Once you acknowledge your shadow and you accept something about yourself, it has less power over you. And that's one of the beautiful things about Aragorn, what makes him such a masculine character. Now, there's no question that he is a warrior. He's absolutely a warrior, a fighter. He calls himself a ranger. He really is willing to fight to protect. Like, he even says to Frodo at one point, like, he will fall into the depths of fiery Mordor or something like that. He will do anything to keep him safe. Like, he will do anything to protect. When they are forming the Fellowship of the Ring in the first movie, and the men are all stepping up to help Frodo out on this mission, Gandalf says, you know, I'll be there to guide you, and Aragorn's like, you know, you have my sword, meaning you have my protection. He has a drive to protect. He really wants to protect people and keep people safe. That's a very big masculine warrior quality to him. He has some magician in him, which I think is very connected to the fact that he was raised with the elves. You even see it too when Frodo gets injured and he wants to get certain herbs to help slow the spread. Like, it's kind of that medicine man kind of aspect to him. You see that very often in magician energy. He doesn't really have magical powers, so to speak, but he has embraced the power of nature, and he's embraced the sort of elven divine feminine powers, so that he really is connected to that. It's interesting with Aragorn, he's not really comfortable yet embracing the fact that he's meant to be a king, but he has such a king-like energy. He's so embodied in his king, and one of the beautiful things about his king-like energy is he's humble. There's an aspect to being a king that needs a level of being humble in order to truly lead in a safe way. The idea that he was really meant to be king, he was supposed to be king, and he's not really stepping into that yet, but he's such a leader. He takes charge, but when he takes charge in a way that he can acknowledge other people's strengths. And again, it's the idea of being a king, but leading from your soul alignment, and not leading from your ego. It's one of the things about Aragorn that makes him such an amazing character. He's not leading from ego. He has a passion, a purpose, a drive. He's a true leader. He can also bow to Gandalf's leadership. He can acknowledge when Gandalf knows something more than he does. He can acknowledge when other people may have knowledge. And that's one of the things about being a leader, is not necessarily just acting as if you know everything and you have control over everything, but it's also knowing when you can use somebody else's strength to help out. Initially, when we meet Arwen, Aragorn's gonna take Frodo to get help, and Arwen's like, no, I'm faster, I'll take him. He acknowledges that and is like, keep safe, keep it, like, he wants her to be safe, but he can also acknowledge that, okay, she might be the best person for this job right now. It's not like, no, I have to prove to everybody that I can do everything better. He's acknowledging that she may have a power and a strength that is greater than his, and he's going to acknowledge and embrace that power and strength because he knows that it helps get them all to where they need to be. And of course, Aragorn's lover energy, because his heart is so connected to Arwen. It's so connected to hers, and she is just there. I mean, they're the definition of soulmates. Like, they're just meant to be together. And not even just that, but the fact that he just has so much love for everybody. He has love for Frodo, for doing what he's doing, and his admiration. And Aragorn has so many references to being very Jesus-like, and I kind of thought that a little bit, because the Aragorn-Arwen relationship had a very sort of, and Arwen has a very Mary Magdalene, but also Mother Mary kind of a quality to her in many of the scenes. But I wasn't really sure with Aragorn, because I was like, okay, he's human and somewhat divine, and he's kind of got that conflict. He has temptations. There's the temptation of ego. There's the temptation of Eowyn, which I'll get to her in a minute. And he never strays. He doesn't stray from that temptation. Like, he's a human man, but he's able to overcome those temptations. There's also the aspect, too, when he goes back to the deceased soldiers, and he tells them that if they will help him, he will raise them from the dead and then forgive them of their past sins. So he's basically, like, relieving the dead of their sins so they can pass into the new life. I mean, there's a lot of Jesus-like qualities with Aragorn, for real. But the ultimate act is when, like, he does all that he does, and he has this, you know, purpose. He becomes king finally, and he is reunited with his true queen, which Arwen is his true queen, and he is just filled with so much love for her, and they come together. It's really beautiful. I'll get to her in a minute. But the moment that he basically looks at the hobbits and says, like, you bow to no one, and he bows to them, that's a big part of being a king. It's a big part of being a king, is acknowledging the contributions that other people have brought to whatever it is that you're doing. Like, you can be a leader, but if you only act like you got to where you got to solely because of you, if it was just your decisions, if it was just your leadership, and all you care about is yourself, you're not going to be a safe, trustable leader. Whereas if you're actually willing to say, yes, I am king, I am leader, I am in charge, I'm taking responsibility, and I'm going to lead this ship, but I'm also going to honor and acknowledge the contributions that other people have made to whatever it is that the goal, the mission is. That's a really important aspect of being a king-like leader, is to not just wield your ego like, yep, I'm in charge, I'm the best, I did everything, I'm gonna take all the credit for everything. It's also acknowledging the contributions that other people make and honoring the contributions that other people made to get you where it is that you've gotten to. And it's so beautiful the way that he honors the hobbits that way. Now Arwen, it's interesting because I found her to be such a mesmerizing part of this movie, but yet she really doesn't have that much screen time. When we first meet her, it's really interesting how she sneaks up on Aragorn and she like kind of holds a knife to his head, kind of like, oh, did I catch a ranger off guard? Or she's got a lot of light feminine and she's got some dark feminine in her too. The beautiful thing about Arwen is she really does hold Aragorn to such a high standard, and she's willing to kind of playfully hold the knife to his head and be like, huh, caught you off guard, not as strong as you think you are you? Obviously she still loves him, obviously she's never gonna hurt him, but it's that kind of call to attention, like, hey, are you paying attention? I don't know if you're fully paying attention. He's a bit in a panic at that point because he's so focused on trying to get help to Frodo. He's getting distracted in his emotions, and she's literally calling him back, like, hey, remember who you are. Important aspect of the feminine. That's actually one of the big purposes of the dark feminine, really, is to call the masculine back to like, hey, buddy, remember who you are. Like, that's an important aspect. When you first see Arwen and she actually like rides up on a horse in this light, she has a very, in that moment I would say, a very Mother Mary kind of like quality to her. She comes up on Frodo and she is the light. I mean, the feminine is the light of radiance, right? So she is the light of radiance that comes in as the healer, and she is gonna help take Frodo to get help. Now again, she says she's faster. Aragorn is so worried about her. He's worried about her being safe, and she's like, don't worry, I know things are going to be okay. She literally is an oracle. She's a seer. She can see the future. So she knows things are going to be okay. When she takes Frodo, that's her huntress energy. She's like, again, it's kind of like that mother protecting her child. It's that huntress. She goes off, and then it's really amazing when she actually is kind of being followed and going to be attacked by the wraiths who want Frodo. And she actually like lures them into the water, and then she summons the river to kind of come and wash them away. The divine feminine connected to nature. The divine feminine is the nature that is going to come and destroy the evil, destroy the dark side, destroy the masculine ego, destroy everything. Like, she's literally controls nature in order to protect, to save, to keep someone safe. Very much connected to divine feminine. So many times in this, Arwen really does see the future. She's a seer. She can see things. She can see the good and the bad. She really is the feminine oracle. And I'm going to do a whole video just about the feminine oracle because it's something I'm very passionate about. But she really is the oracle for Aragorn. And Aragorn is a really beautiful scene when he's kind of struggling with his fear of himself, fear of his bloodline. And Arwen is basically, you know, telling him, like, I know what kind of man you are. I know what kind of a man you're capable of being. She really does give her heart to him. Like, she knows what an aligned masculine man he's capable of, and she holds him to that standard because she knows he's capable of being at that standard, and that's why she loves him. Arwen is the epitome of loyalty. I think a lot of times men want that level of loyalty, but they're not willing to embody Aragorn's level of divine masculine. Now look, is Aragorn really the ultimate as far as a masculine character? Absolutely. Is any human male going to actually be able to live up to that standard? Probably not. We're talking about like a truly divine masculine character. He's divine, but like I'm saying, like he's the model to which you live up to as far as your divine masculine. Now, is your human, is your Boromir probably gonna come out in you at some point? Probably. It's not a matter of being perfect, but it's taking the inspiration from someone like Aragorn of like, hey, are you letting your ego, your shadows, your dark side, are you letting them control you, or are you in control of them? Are you striving for a purpose? Are you willing to fight to protect those that you love? Are you willing to bow down to those who may know more than you? Are you willing to acknowledge the contributions of other people to the projects you're working on? Are you willing to know your strengths and weaknesses? Like, are you willing to do those things? Are you going to be perfect all the time? No. Is Aragorn perfect most of the time? yeah, pretty dead on. But it's not about being perfect, but it's about taking that as inspiration. And when you get that level of man that's stepping up like that, you get that level of loyalty from a partner like Arwen. Now, Arwen's struggle is that Arwen is supposed to be immortal, but she wants to be with a mortal. And there's that conflict within her. The thing about the feminine is the feminine longs for things to last forever. She doesn't like endings to things. The masculine is much more comfortable with endings. However, Arwen's struggle is that if she does live forever, eventually she will lose Aragorn because he's mortal. And it's one of the fears that her father has, is that she will then spend eternity basically having lost love. Like, she can have the love that she wants right now in this moment, but she's gonna end up eternally suffering because eventually she's gonna lose that love. Arwen is willing to risk that because the feminine desires love. The feminine desires to be filled with love. She really is living for the love that is right now. A true feminine being is going to live for the love right now in the moment. The masculine often thinks to the future, has the direction. The feminine is going to be like, okay, I live for love right now in this moment. And that's really the deal with Arwen, is that, you know, she's got this conflict between forever and the right now, and she's choosing the right now. She's choosing to love him right now. The feminine's gonna want to experience life. The idea of a truly feminine being giving up love now because of hurt later on, because in reality, unfortunately, none of us survive forever, right? The feminine is going to choose life and love right now, especially because she sees her future, and she sees her future with Aragorn, with a child. Feminine is going to long for that. She's going to want to live life to the fullest, even if it means pain, even if it means like inevitable heartbreak. The feminine is going to choose love. And that's what Arwen does. Arwen is always choosing love. She's being discouraged from it. Her father is telling her it's going to be inevitable pain. Aragorn doesn't want to cause her inevitable pain. But she will always choose love. The feminine will always choose love, even if she knows that it's going to end up causing her pain. And none of this is to excuse like being in a toxic relationship or anything like that. However, if you're afraid of ever getting into a relationship because you're afraid of potentially getting your heart broken, so you never open yourself up to love because you're always afraid of that pain, you're never going to be able to fully experience life. I get it. I've been there. I understand it. I know that that can be a struggle. I know that, especially if you've been hurt before in the past, you can get into this idea of like, okay, well, if I just shut myself down from love and from life, believe me, believe me, I've been there. You don't have to experience that pain and hurt again. But the thing is that pain and hurt is a part of life, and the feminine longs to live life to its fullest. That's why she keeps opening herself up to love with Aragorn, even though she knows that it probably will inevitably bring her pain. She's choosing love now, as opposed to fearing that it may not go that she wants it to go, or it may not go, or it's probably going to go a certain way, but eventually that certain way is going to be heartache because she might lose him. She will eventually lose him. She still wants to choose love and life right now. And that's why you can tell those two are so meant to be together. It's interesting too, we have Arwen. She is really, I would say, a woman who is trying so hard to fit into a man's world. She's trying to be a warrior. She's trying to be a fighter. She's trying to be more masculine. She really falls for Aragorn. I mean, why wouldn't you fall for Aragorn, right? She kind of tries to go for Aragorn. Aragorn's, you know, like, he respects her. He treats her with absolute respect. He's not one of those masculine men who's just like, stop trying to be masculine. You're too masculine. You should be more of a woman. No, he doesn't try to diminish anything about her. He doesn't try to, you know, discourage her. He, you know, it's like, hey, you do what you want to do, but he's not magnetized to her because he's so masculine. He's not going to be as magnetized to a woman who is fighting so hard to be in her masculine. And if you look at the comparison between how much he loves Arwen and the fact that he respects Arwen but isn't attracted to her. Now, Arwen is not a weak woman by any means. She's a strong, powerful woman, but she's connected to her divine feminine strength. She's not weak and passive, but she's connected to her divine feminine strength, as opposed to Arwen, who is fighting so hard to be a masculine person in a masculine world and to get that respect. She does get Aragorn's respect. She doesn't win his heart, because it's the divine feminine woman that wins his heart, because she is in a polarized alignment to his divine masculine. Like, her divine feminine is connected to his divine masculine, whereas someone like Arwen, who is fighting so hard to connect to her masculine energy. Aragorn respects her a lot, but he's not actually drawn to her. And I think there's a difference, because there's a misconception that being feminine means you need to be weak and passive. In reality, you can have a lot of divine feminine strength, and that's actually an important part of being the divine feminine. But you're not fighting to be a masculine being in a masculine world. It's a different type of strength. And I think that's where the difference between Arwen and Arwen is actually a real example of that. I think we can learn a lot from those characters in how you can embody your divine feminine strength as opposed to fighting to be more masculine in a masculine world. And again, there's so many like biblical references. Again, the breaking of the bread, the David and Goliath stories, the, you know, prodigal son aspect to things. I mean, there was like a burning, you know, Faramir alive. The fact that Gandalf flew in on an eagle, on eagle's wings, and, you know, rescued everybody. I mean, really symbolic of really a divine masculine type character. And again, this was really coming of age story for the Hobbits, of this masculine initiation. And in past cultures, boys would be taken from their mothers and they would be sent to a tribe where they would study with masculine men in order to initiate them into their masculinity. And they'd go through some really invasive practices to really kind of get them out of boyhood and turn them into men. Like, I touch on this in my 300 breakdown. And this is really what is going on with the Hobbits. They're really learning how to become true men, and that's really kind of the path they go on. And of course, Frodo really does go through the whole process of seeking adventure and then getting that adventure, and, you know, is the ring gonna break him, is it not gonna break him? Frodo goes through all kinds of inner conflicts and the possibility that this mission may be his inevitable death. And it really is a story about, you know, even one small person can make a huge difference in the world. There's so much symbolism in these movies. I'm sure I just scratched the surface, but I wanted to touch on some of the divine masculine, divine feminine qualities that really jumped out at me, because in reality, I talk a lot about the masculine and the feminine in a lot of these films, but this one did have a very like spiritual divine masculine, divine feminine element that you don't see in all of the films that I've broken down. So really wanted to touch on this. I realized that these are 3 very long films. Personally, the Fellowship of the Ring, which I didn't even dive into this, but like is really a symbol of brotherhood. It's very much this, you know, men stepping up to help other men, which is, you know, brotherhood in our society right now is something that we're really lacking. You know, masculine leadership, strong masculine leaders of brotherhood. You know, men tend to be very isolated in our society. Women do as well, but in this particular case, talking about brotherhood. I really found The Fellowship of the Ring, the first film, to be really the one that really held my attention the longest. It also did have more of Aragorn and Arwen's relationship in it, so that was my favorite. Return of the King was probably next. The Twin Towers for me was a little dragged out a little bit much, but just my personal opinion. If you have differences of opinion and liked different ones over others, cool. I usually say after you watch this video, I recommend you watch the movies, see if you can pick up on anything I mentioned. I realize these are long movies. If you want to watch them and pick up on what I mentioned, or if you've already seen them, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of my perspective on the masculine and feminine dynamics in these movies. I understand if you're not actually going to commit to watching all of them. I took several weekends to watch them, so I enjoyed them. I'm glad I finally watched them. After years of saying that I'll eventually watch them someday, I'm glad I actually watched them. So if you want to check them out, I do really think that they're fascinating movies. They're well done. I would recommend watching them. I will try to put up some little film clip scenes to try to sum up some of the things that I mentioned here on my YouTube shorts and on my TikTok, provided copyright lets me do it. You can get little summaries and actually see some of these scenes and how they played out in the actual movie. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you have any thoughts on any of these topics or anything, or any other film suggestions, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you. If you're a woman and would like to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses. Details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.